Today is a special day for Michelle and I because we get to talk to a friend of ours that has been working with Dirk and Sandy for many years, since 1991, in fact. And I would read his accomplishments to you, but I don't want to take any more of his time because we did have a nice chat before we started taping this, and we're excited to share this not only with people that come to Tonopah, but with other people that ought to respect the lives of Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you one of the most influential men in our country, in our country's history, that has defended the First Amendment. Probably the most important and knowledgeable First Amendment attorney in the United States. And Jonathan Emord, thank you for joining us. A friend of Dirk and Sandy since '91, and still a friend. You talked to Dirk even recently, so thanks for joining us, and share with the listeners and the viewers a little bit about how important Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw were to you, and how much you respected working with them.
Well, I have to say that among the events in my life that have had the most impact, without question, are the moments that I have shared with Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw, and how I miss them so greatly because they are unique in the history of the world. They were unique defenders of liberty. They have established themselves in the lexicon of the First Amendment and also in the history of free loving peoples as champions of liberty, unique in all the world. And their personalities, as you know, and as I know well from representing them for 30 years, are just exceptional. They were honest to the core. They were brilliant. Dirk was a genius. Sandy was brilliant in every respect. They were complementary. They worked diligently to fight for First Amendment freedoms and to uncover gems in science that, when revealed to the public, could lead to greater longevity. Information about the effects of nutrients on reduction in the risk of disease, on delaying the onset of disease, and on mitigating and even curing disease. They were the first and foremost scientific minds that were brought to bear on this subject in the 20th century in a major way, in a way that translated the information that was otherwise locked into science to the public at large, largely through their number one best-selling book, Life Extension: A Practical Scientific Approach, which was on the bestsellers list week after week after week, month after month after month. They were on over 100 episodes of the Merv Griffith Show, which was an extremely popular show back in the day, and also on Johnny Carson. They were all over the place. I mean, Dirk and Sandy wrote screenplays for Clint Eastwood. They appeared in his Deadpool movie in a brief segment at the funeral scene. Um, I first met Dirk and Sandy in October of 1991. I was a vice president at the Cato Institute. I had written a policy paper called Contrived Distinctions: The Doctrine of Commercial Speech and First Amendment Jurisprudence. Rather academic thing. And despite the fact that it was in an area that was technically outside of their main area of focus, like so many other things, they were masters of the law, as well as the science, as well as modern screenplays, as well as just about anything, any subject. Um, I got a phone call from them both, and they oftentimes spoke together on the phone, and it was frequently hilarious to have them both on the phone. One chiming in, another one chiming in. Their minds were so active that it was like a ping pong match, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, with Dirk and Sandy communicating to you information that you had never heard before, largely because it was from this massive trove of treasure that they were and that they had with them all the time in their minds. So they contacted me and they said they had read this policy study that I wrote for the Cato Institute. They said that they thought it was brilliant and that they thought it was the exact answer to a problem they were confronting at the Food and Drug Administration. They said that the FDA was censoring truthful information, nutrient disease relationship information, keeping it from the American public, and that there were lives at stake, and many people were dying as a result of the not simply not knowing, and many children were being born with defects, birth defects, not knowing that folic acid, for example, could reduce the risk of a neural tube defect birth if consumed by women of childbearing age before they became pregnant. They explained all these things to me in a rapid fire fashion, which was their way. And then they asked me if I would represent them. And I said, well, I'm working for this nonprofit organization as the vice president. And I can't undertake representation while serving as the vice president of the Cato Institute. They said, well, this is more important than that. And they said that you really have to do this. And I said, well, I couldn't undertake representation in any event with one client because I wouldn't want to undertake it given that level of risk. They said, well, hold on, we'll be back in touch with you. Literally 24 hours later, they called back. They said that they had established a connection with 4 other parties that they would collectively put into a trust account enough money to pay for me for the next 5 years in representing them if I would undertake this as my primary function. And so I looked at their proposal. It was better than I could possibly imagine. And I told them that I love the whole idea of what they were talking about, and that I had done some preliminary research, but was still interested in completing that research, but believed they had a good case. We then talked as partners. We would talk about the law. We talk about the intricacies of the law. They would read everything, absolutely everything. They would read cases all the way back to the founding of the Republic. They would bring cases to my attention that I was not familiar with, and I would look at those cases. We constructed this argument against the Food and Drug Administration that resulted in a landmark decision called Pearson versus Shalala in 1999. We filed comments in a rulemaking in 94, trying to lay the foundation for a First Amendment attack against this regime of censorship at FDA. In 99, we went to the oral argument. I remember that well because Sandy said she was, and I knew this, she was extremely hard of hearing. That was because she had a brain tumor. It was an inoperable brain tumor, according to the medical authorities. But Dirk said he could deal with it. He said, I can treat this, Sandy. I can actually do the operation. He was a genius, remember. And so he said, while if we listen to them, then you surely will die. If we fight this thing together, we can overcome it. But I want you to know that you'll suffer some disabilities. You'll suffer some speech disabilities, hearing disabilities. You'll have epilepsy and seizures. Do you want to live like that? And Sandy said, I do. And he said, all right. So then he arranged to have this operation, which again, it was inoperable. They said they couldn't reach the tumor without killing her. And he arranged a method for reaching it. And it's because he was a genius. I mean, he did everything from at MIT, he taught graduate level physics courses. When he was in TRW, he developed the life support system for the Gemini spacecraft. He also was contacted by the military after his stint at TRW. They had a vexing problem to try to figure out how to perfect the guidance system of the cruise missile. And he secretly gave them guidance on how to do that using mathematical formulas that were enabled to overcome problems that they were confronting in developing the guidance system. Over and over again, these people were Renaissance in their nature, brilliant geniuses that contributed enormously. Sandy, in her own right, was a genius when it came to food processing and sanitation. She understood all the elements of it, so much so that she would dictate in the contracts that they engaged in the sources for the products and ensure that they had the highest integrity, the highest quality. So anyway, we had this Pearson versus Shalala case, which is a landmark decision. And Sandy wanted to be in the oral argument, but she had to read the lips of the people in order to understand what was being said. So she asked me if I could make arrangements with the clerk of the court for her to sit in the dock next to the judges so that she could see them and see their mouths moving and see me and see my mouth moving so she could read our lips and understand what was going on in the oral argument.
Amazing.
So we made a special arrangement for her, and the court agreed to it. And she sat in the dock of the court where no one else is allowed to sit except for the clerks and the court reporter. And she watched the argument and was delighted by it. And she knew, as we did when we left that argument, that we had destroyed the government's case. And we would go on to do that in numerous other instances, both for them personally and for in the fight against the First Amendment suppression that was going on. They transformed the law. They took this was in the New York Times. It was in Life Extension magazine. It was all over the place that this decision, this landmark decision, had changed the nature of FDA regulation so that they couldn't censor speech anymore. They had to allow truthful information and rely on claim qualification as a less speech restrictive alternative to outright suppression. This let the folic acid claim into the marketplace. What was the effect of that? As we explained and as the court accepted in the science presentations, there were 2,500 preventable neural tube defect births a year for a decade. There were countless NTD-related abortions. But after that decision, within 1 year, the numbers began to drop. So much so that within 2 years of that decision, the numbers were down in the low hundreds for preventable neural tube defect births, and NTD-related abortions became almost non-existent in America. And the March of Dimes, which used to always advertise across the nation for support to deal with neural tube defect births, largely became less of a mouthpiece because on the airwaves because the problem was largely being solved by folic acid. 800 micrograms of folic acid a day could reduce the risk of a neural tube defect birth by as much as 80%. So that was one of just numerous nutrient disease relationship claims, including omega-3 fatty acids reducing the risk of coronary heart disease, antioxidant vitamins reducing the risk of cancer, selenium reducing the risk of cancer, and on vitamin B6, B12, and folic acid in combination reducing the risk of vascular disease by lowering homocysteine levels, on and on and on. The parade of science and of brilliant argument that we had the privilege of working together to produce occurred again and again. And then there was more the personal side of Dirk and Sandy. Hilarious people, funny as can be, brilliant, just constantly rolling off their tongues were witticisms that were funny at times and also just piercing. Honest to the core. They had no dishonest aspect of their anatomies. It just didn't exist. Anything they said was bankable. Anything they
Sorry to interrupt, but they both of them had the greatest laughs in the world. I mean, some of my memories of them will always be of them laughing at themselves and other things that they thought were funny.
Yeah, and I can't tell you the number of times in conversations with Dirk and Sandy, they would bring up other subjects that are entirely outside of the field of nutrition and reveal an extraordinary depth of knowledge. And they are truly two of the most remarkable people of the 20th and 21st centuries. They are etched in history. Their contribution to the law is fundamental and is a point. I teach classes at Georgetown Law School once a year on the Dirk and Sandy cases. They ask me every year to come to an Ivy League school and teach that to new generations of students because it was a revolution in the law, and it stands for the fundamental precepts that underlie the Constitution, the First Amendment. And they were in love with the Constitution. They loved the founding fathers. Sandy, in particular, she absolutely loved to read about and to discuss with me the ideological origins of the Constitution and the First Amendment, and how our fight in the law could restore the foundational principles of this country. That's what it was all about. Yes, they wanted to break down censorship, but what they also wanted to do was restore limited government, bring back from exile the doctrines that limit the power of the federal government, to restore those things. They were brilliant libertarians. Their writings are all over the place in Reason magazine. The Cato Institute was very familiar with them before I had my first conversation with them. Knew them to be brilliant, knew them to be geniuses, and respected deeply any contribution, any letter, anything that came from Dirk and Sandy was immediately reviewed with a high degree of interest. Just to give you an idea of how far afield some of these things went. So Dirk and Sandy starred in a little known Disney movie where it was on Einstein's theory of relativity. And Dirk and Sandy flew in this aircraft that did a parabola into the upper atmosphere where it replicates zero gravity. And Dirk used that as an opportunity while floating in zero gravity to explain Einstein's theory of relativity in relatively digestible form for students in schools across the country. That little video was shown to millions of students in the United States in school and even over in Europe, and was the point of great joy for generations of kids who looked at that. Dirk knew how to blend humor, genius, and incisive commentary. He was a brilliant spokesman. Frequently, someone with that kind of intellect, you would expect them to be difficult to understand. Not at all with Dirk and Sandy. They mastered the art of communication. That's why their Life Extension, a Practical Scientific Approach book was so popular. It was because they took extremely difficult, complicated concepts of biochemistry and biology and nutrition science, and physiology and pharmacology, and put it all together in a form that would be capable of being understood by the typical person. They then wrote numerous other books about weight loss and other things, and about politics. And they contributed to my works on politics and law. They would review portions of it. They would comment on it. Numerous times I benefited in my career fundamentally from Dirk and Sandy. In fact, I'm quite confident that without them, I would not have been able to succeed as well as I have in the law, because it was sort of almost in the stars that we would meet. It was a magnificent thing. They searched out for the First Amendment attorney that they thought could win those Pearson cases. And when we found one another, when they found me, I was just as delighted to meet them as they were to meet me. And over the years, some 30 years of representation on numerous things, I came to love them and respect them deeply. Dirk purchased a mountain in Tonopah, half a mountain, and I bought the other half, Vindicator Mountain in Nevada. And I went to court with them right in their backyard and defended them in a case in Tonopah, and and that too was just a charming thing. I stayed with them for a month, and I got to really appreciate their snakes, their massive collection of weapons, of guns, and of gold and all sorts of things, and their cattle. I mean, their involvement with the Sagebrush Rebellion. They were instrumental in fighting for the rights of people against the federal government taking over farmlands and driving farmers and ranchers out of existence. They were extremely effective advocates. They helped organize things, and they were behind Dick Carver every step of the way when he fought for reopening the RS 2477 right away that the feds wrongfully closed, at the link between the old courthouse in Tonopah and the new one. And they succeeded in getting that open. They had a hilarious video that they sent me. I wish I still had it. it corroded over time, but it showed just how incredibly strong and stalwart they were in defense of liberty. They were fearless. That's the last aspect I wanted to talk about today. Dirk and Sandy were courageous warriors for freedom. They had a lot to lose. They went up against the whole federal system. They took on the battles that almost every other party would love to have done, but never could have done because of fear. They feared retribution. They feared that they have to live with this horrible thing, the Food and Drug Administration, over time. Not Dirk and Sandy. They said, this is going to end. We're going to fight it and we're going to win. The other remarkable thing about them is that they had indefatigable optimism. They knew they would overcome this. They knew they were right on the law. They knew that they were aligned with the founding fathers. They knew that almost from a spiritual sense, they were right. And they meant to ensure that that was borne out. When I did that oral argument in Pearson and Sandy was there, she was beaming, smiling. She loved every single minute of it. Sandy also, one thing about Sandy, Sandy was a child in certain respects, in the beautiful respects of being simply innocent, trusting, honest, and decent. And Dirk was too. Dirk was more of a hard-boiled egg. When you rub Dirk the wrong way, he let you know, and he did not tolerate fools, not for a minute. Um, and he was remarkable. I remember one time I was talking to Dirk, and I needed, it was in the old days, I needed to send him a fax. And Sandy got on the phone and she said, Dirk can't talk to you now, Jonathan. He's got to fix the telephone pole. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, he's climbing up the telephone pole because he asked numerous times for the local telephone authority to come out here and fix the line that we use for the fax machine, but they wouldn't do it. So Dirk's out there doing it himself. He climbed up the telephone pole and did it himself. Dirk created desert lobster. So in Nevada, sometimes when you drive between Las Vegas and Tonopah, there'll be a roadside stand. There would be a roadside stand, and at that stand would be crawfish, but genetically engineered by Dirk to look like a lobster with a long tail. And he called it desert lobster, and he sold it to people. He did all sorts of things like that. He created this machine. He called me one time and he said, the federalities are bothering me, Jonathan. I need your help to deal with the EPA. Can you do that? I said, absolutely, Dirk. So we dealt with the EPA and we succeeded, as we always did. Dirk, Sandy, and I always seemed to win. But when it came to this, there was a little spring on one parcel of their property. And that spring, they installed into that spring a processing device that Dirk developed that would extract gold from the water that was going through. And it worked rather well. They made a decent amount of money off that thing monthly. And then the federales came in and said there was this snail darter fish inside the water, and that thing was interrupting its natural habitat, and they said it was an endangered species, and they ordered Dirk to remove it. Well, Dirk showed that the fish that they said naturally occurred in that water could not have been there because of the pH and other factors in the water, and had to have been planted by one of the EPA people in order to create the argument. He showed that it simply could not survive in that pH. And he was right. He proved it definitively, and they all backed down and recognized that over the years they tried to get rid of his ranch, they tried to get rid of anything that he did to his property, and he fought back every single step of the way. Wayne Hage benefited greatly from his association with Dirk and Sandy, and Wayne Hage Jr., and we all did. I can't tell you in closing, I cannot express in words the extent of the profound loss that I experienced when Dirk and Sandy passed away. Sandy went first, and it was a horrific thing, and it crushed Dirk. It hurt him badly. He loved Sandy. they would frequently have little spats, and I was privy to those things. One hilarious one, Dirk developed a blueprint for a rocket to take him into upper Earth orbit around the Earth with enough food and oxygen to last for 30, I think 60 days, something like that. But he didn't make the calculation for Sandy to be in the spacecraft, and she got furious with him about that. And he said, "Sandy, you can make your own." And Dirk said that he and all of his calculation, the resources he had available, that was all that he could handle was the one for himself. And this was for a nuclear holocaust. They were developing this to get them into orbit so that they wouldn't be destroyed by a nuclear holocaust. They were
Oh, Jonathan,
frustrated.
I thank you for all this. I mean, you could go on and on, I know, but I just, these, you're bringing out a couple stories that it's fun for me to share with you. And if everybody else likes them, that's great because every time Michelle and I would call Dirk and Sandy out in Tonopah to ask them anything, Dirk would put his hand over the microphone. He goes, Sandy, get on the
Yeah,
phone. It's the Priors.
yeah, yeah. And he had that little horn too. Remember, he'd honk it. Say it was at a decibel level she could hear. That's why he used that horn.
But in '91, I met Dirk and Sandy in Dallas at a meeting I told you before we started taping this, and as a former professional baseball player, trying to make my way and raising three daughters and helping create income for my family, I was given the opportunity to represent Dirk and Sandy's formulas in the marketplace, and that's the last thing I wanted to do because I had never heard of them. So I called a friend of mine that was representing Dr. Ignaro, who won the Nobel Prize for medicine with two other doctors, and he wanted to get me on the phone with Dr. Ignaro. Or get Dirk on the phone with Dr. Ignaro because he knew that I knew him. And Dave Brubaker owned Your Life, which it was sold in Kmart's nationwide. So I got those two connected. And what a great conversation Dr. Ignaro had, and a thrill for him to meet Dirk. But unfortunately, the only reason he was wanting to talk to Dirk was so he could get smarter.
Let
So,
me tell you one last story about Dirk and Sandy. So I represented them in litigation over a number of times, and one time I was preparing them for depositions, and they met me in Las Vegas to do that in Caesar's Palace. And Dirk came in with his cowboy hat on and his shorts, and everyone was looking. But Dirk was such a phenomena at the time that a lot of people knew who Dirk was. And so part of when we had a free moment, we went to see Siegfried and Roy. And no longer, I don't think they're on the Vegas Strip anymore. But anyway, Siegfried and Roy were about to do their show. Dirk and I came in, and someone who knew Dirk gave us front row seats at the event. So Dirk was in the center, in the front, and everyone in this packed auditorium, probably over 1,000 people, saw Dirk Pearson coming in, and you could hear people saying, "Hey, that's Dirk Pearson." And as we walked down and we sat down, and then somebody said, as they're starting the show, and the dry ice is starting to pour over the stage, and someone said, "Hey, Dirk, tell us what that is." And Dirk stands up and turns to the whole audience, just very nonchalant. Dirk heard that, stood up, turns around to the whole audience, and gives a scientific explanation about dry ice, and explains how it's innocuous and would not cause any injury and all of this. And it interrupted the start time of the show. But Siegfried and Roy apparently and their crew understood that that was Dirk Pearson, and they just waited. And so it was about 5 minutes into the show before they started. And as soon as Dirk sat down, then everything opens up and it starts. It was
wonderful.
fantastic.
Wonderful. We've had dinner in Vegas with Dirk and Sandy several times, and we've been to Tonopah, and we're so looking forward to going back because it'll be a different kind of a trip. but there'll be people there that loved him throughout the different parts of their life. And they touched so many people, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that never met him, that didn't even know who they were, and didn't know part of what you've just shared with all of us. But they we America and the world is missing two great scientists. uh,
Yeah.
it's
I
hard to
mean,
put a word on them.
truly, they are great figures in the history of the United States. They are unquestionably going to be in the history books. They are going to be they already are in books of law. They are the subject of study. They're fascinating people. They are living way beyond their years. They will live for generations because of the contributions they made. And it was just an honor, a real privilege to be able to get to know them. It would have been a pity, and it would have impoverished my existence substantially had I not had the chance to work with them. And what a great honor it was to be their lawyer for so many years, and more importantly, to have them as my friends and to have them really share with me so much of their lives over those years. And I appreciate it. I miss them terribly, and I know everyone assembled in Tonopah for this event will miss them very much too. And people around the world will obviously experience loss from this.